impact of a weaker shilling on manufacturing?
Well, yes, it depends which side of the divide you are, because we've got manufacturers who are exporting, manufacturers who are selling into the home market. Obviously, if you're exporting, you're laughing all the way to the bank because you're getting many more shillings into your account with the same amount of dollars that you would sell. And if you're importing, it's the other way around, and then you're battling with passing these costs down to the consumer. And so it's actually a mixed reaction in Kenya, depending on which side of the divide you are. And it also has an effect on import substitution. So if you're competing with imports coming in from Asia, of course the finished goods will cost a lot more in Kenyan shillings than it would if you were importing raw materials, and that component of costing would probably be 30 or 40%. So your 30-40% in the equation would go up in price, but your domestic cost will not. So it has a double-edged sword. But definitely what we're seeing is inflation going down into the marketplace. And I think we need a more balanced view on this whole thing.
I mean, the general view, Jas, is that Kenyan manufacturers are net importers of inputs and raw materials, and that ultimately, across the manufacturing spectrum, you're going to suffer.
That's true. We are net importers of raw materials, but it depends on what constitutes to your import value on your raw materials. Is it 30%, 40%, 50%? So if it's 30, 40, 50% of your raw material is imported, that is what is going to be impacted with this Kenyan shilling. But your local costs are not. So if you look at it, and if imported goods, finished goods are coming into the country in a liberalized market, then we actually see that impact, that imports slow down and exports start growing. And it's a mixed reaction. But what we would like as manufacturers is a more predictable shilling. So that's where the problem is. Because we don't know what to cost at. Do we cost at 90 shillings? Should we cost at 85 shillings?
Right.
And if we're going to cost at 90, we have to pass it on through the consumer, and then inflationary trends are kicking in into Kenya, and we're seeing a slowdown on demand because of inflation, because of the pass-through costs.
What would be a fair value for the shilling? Because I think now that we're in the region of 90, 91 shillings, some would say it's special circumstances. It's not really an indication of the fundamentals of the shilling and monetary policy.
Well, what you see is, if you see in the last couple of years what's really happened in Kenya, we've had a relatively strong shilling. It's been around 60, 62 shillings. I mean, prior to that it was 82 shillings, and it stayed at about 60 to 65 shillings for a long period. Then it came down to about 72, 75, 78, 80, and it's been at about 80, 82 for a long period. In the last couple of weeks, we've seen it go from 80 to 84 to 87 to 90 to 92 yesterday. Now, that is where the problem is, because the predictability is not in the equation. I mean, what do we cost our goods at 90 shillings or 100 shillings or 80 shillings? And I think the fair value would be if the central bank would come up with a policy and have the market forces to play between a band, say 85 being the lowest, 90 being the highest, or 82, 86, or whatever it is. At least the importers and the exporters know what their upper ceiling is and what their lower ceiling is. I think that's what we're battling with. At this point in time, central bank is very clear they don't want to intervene into the dollar and let market forces play, but in the process, inflation is kicking into the marketplace, and that is what our greatest worry, because demand will slow down now.
I mean, talking about inflation and the broader inflationary risks, we know that the figures for inflation came in the region of 12.95% in the month of May, and as a result, we're already seeing trade unions arguing that they want wage increases to reflect that rate. That ultimately is going to impact on the fixed costs of manufacturers. The broader impact on your margins going into the second half of the year?
Well, you see, the trade unions, we've had a wage increase of 12.5% on 1st of May. That was awarded by government. But yes, they were talking about 60% to hedge the inflation. But then it just kills your competitiveness. And yes, we've had about 4 or 5% inflation in the last couple of years. This is the first time we're seeing it going to double digit. So yes, it's going to have an impact on our manufacturing, because we see slowdown of our demand, because if consumer spending is not there, of course it impacts the manufacturing sector. So we are a little worried at this point in time. We've got a looming maize shortage coming up, and we're looking at the price of basic commodities, sugar, wheat flour, maize, everything is doubling. The government has just announced they're going to allow duty-free maize to come into the country and wheat, so that they can cushion some of these costs. And they've also announced that diesel and kerosene, which is used in manufacturing, will be zero rated for some period. So the government is trying to mitigate all that extra cost which is going through the chute right now.